Let's start by thinking about something we all deal with. We spend our whole lives accumulating things, right? Tracing experiences. And yet, so often, we end up carrying this really heavy, completely invisible weight around in our minds. I'm talking about the weight of our past actions, that restless, nagging conscience.
Okay, let's dive into this, because this whole question of regret, it isn't just about feeling a little guilty on a Tuesday afternoon. In the ancient texts of the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, which we're unpacking in today's explainer, worldly ignorance and that psychological friction of regret, they're actually viewed as the ultimate roadblocks to spiritual freedom. I mean, think about it. If your mind is constantly looking over its shoulder at past mistakes, how can it possibly look forward to enlightenment? The ancient bodhisattva solution here isn't just to, let it go. It's a highly structured, almost psychological science of the mind.
So the sutra outlines this ascending progression known as the three trainings: pure precepts, deep concentration, and true wisdom. Now I know what you're thinking. When we hear the word precepts or rules, we immediately picture restrictive checklists, right? Things designed to stop us from having fun. But the Mahaparinirvana Sutra completely flips this on its head. On the Bodhisattva path, these aren't chains that bind you. They are literally the engine, the essential first spark that ignites deep concentration, which then naturally blooms into ultimate wisdom. You absolutely cannot skip step 1 and expect to reach step 3. They build on each other in a very specific, progressive way.
And the sutra draws the strict, really fascinating line between worldly precepts and bodhisattva pure precepts. It's a night and day difference. Worldly precepts are basically flawed and conditional. Maybe you're just following the rules to look good, or out of fear of getting caught, or maybe you're expecting some kind of reward. Because they're driven by ego and attachment, they inevitably lead to anxiety, failure, and, regret. But bodhisattva pure precepts, they are totally unconditional. When you hold them selflessly for the benefit of all beings, without expecting some worldly prize, it completely removes that psychological friction. It actually becomes the inner driving force for ultimate liberation.
To make this abstract idea super clear, the Buddha in the sutra actually shares a brilliant little mini-story. Picture this. 2 women are walking to the city to sell their goods. One is carrying a pitcher of rich, precious yogurt. The other is lugging around a pitcher of cheap, watery whey. As they're walking, they both trip. Both of their pitchers crash to the ground and shatter.
And this brilliantly illustrates the whole psychological difference here. The woman with the watery whey is totally distressed. She's sorrowful because, well, her foundation was poor to begin with, and now her container is destroyed. But the woman who carried the yogurt, even though her pitcher is broken, the yogurt itself is thick, rich, and completely pure. So she feels this natural relief and joy because the core value wasn't lost. The sutra uses this to show us how a flawed foundation of worldly precepts brings massive distress when life goes sideways. But pure bodhisattva precepts, they bring a natural, resilient joy, completely regardless of external circumstances.
The text then hits us with this absolutely gorgeous imagery. Like holding a bright mirror without expecting to see one's face, the image naturally appears. It's like a farmer planting a seed in really good soil where it just naturally sprouts, or lighting a lamp that effortlessly banishes the darkness. The key point here is inevitability. When you practice pure precepts, you don't have to force yourself to be happy. You don't have to desperately strain for peace. A clear conscience naturally, almost automatically produces joy. It's a built-in psychological reaction.
So how does all this translate into actual meditation? Well, there's an exact, unbreakable causal chain. Pure precepts act as the active driving force, right? And that leads directly to a state of no regret. When there's no regret, the mind naturally blooms into joy and delight. That delight then completely settles the nervous system into deep peace, which finally allows for unmoving concentration. Removing guilt isn't just some nice, polite moral idea. It is the absolute required psychological engine for true deep focus. Actually, let's pause on these emotional stages for a second, because the sutra makes a really fascinating distinction. It separates simple joy, translated from the character shi, from a profound delight, translated from li. You see, joy is just what you feel when you manage to avoid doing something bad. It's basically just the absence of a negative action. But delight? That is a deep, ascending, profound state of well-being that only arises when your heart is actively pure and holding those bodhisattva precepts. It's a much higher, far more stabilizing frequency of peace.
Once that deep delight totally settles the mind, we enter the second of the 3 trainings, concentration. The sutra compares this state of mind to Mount Sumeru, which is the mythical, massive mountain at the center of the universe. It's firmly rooted. It doesn't get blown around by the winds of the foreign versions. Those ordinary delusions we all suffer from. like mistaking something temporary for something permanent. The mind becomes completely, utterly still. It becomes a fortress built straight on the bedrock of a guilt-free conscious.
Let's move to and see how this builds into the final stage. From that unmoving concentration, the mind operates like a perfectly still pool of water. It finally reflects reality exactly as it is, which yields true insight. Seeing reality truly like that naturally develops a healthy disgust with samsara, that exhausting, endless cycle of worldly suffering. And that turning away, that triggers absolute liberation. This is the third training, wisdom. As you can see, it all flows sequentially, starting all the way back from that initial purity of action.
Now, we kind of need to broaden our scope a bit here, because the sutra makes it very clear that this isn't just a weekend retreat kind of deal. This journey spans asamkhaya kalpas. That's an ancient Sanskrit term for countless, literally infinite eons. A bodhisattva begins way back in the distant past with an aspiration for bodhi, or awakening. They spend entire lifetimes ascending these trainings, holding precepts, perfecting concentration, and building wisdom, all without any grasping or attachment. They do this over and over until they reach the final climax, clearly seeing their own inherent Buddha nature.
At the absolute pinnacle of this journey, the sutra explains that the bodhisattva achieves what's called the four unhindered wisdoms. They become perfectly unhindered in understanding the Dharma, unhindered in grasping the true meaning behind all things, unhindered in language, meaning they can explain these concepts infinitely, and unhindered in their delight in speaking and teaching others. They are completely 100% free from the attachments, the fears, and the bindings that choke the ordinary human mind.
And what is it they're actually able to see with all this unhindered wisdom? Buddha nature. That is the ultimate destination. Buddha nature is the inherent, totally luminous truth within absolutely every single being. It has always been there. It's kind of like a gorgeous jewel that's just covered in mud. It can only be seen when the mind is completely liberated from the static of delusion and the turbulence of worldly attachment. And remember the sheer, inner driving force that actually washed all that mud away? It was those pure precepts, held faithfully from the very beginning.
We've traversed infinite eons and ultimate truths in our explainer today, but honestly, the brilliance of this teaching is just how deeply practical it is. The highest, most transcendent wisdom of the Buddha nature, it doesn't start somewhere up in the clouds. It starts right now, with your everyday actions. It starts with a pure heart that refuses to carry the heavy, totally useless baggage of regret. So I'll leave you with this. If the path to ultimate unshakable liberation begins simply with an unburdened conscience today, what is holding you back from taking the first step? Thank you so much for exploring this with me.